First, the sweeping indictment of former President Trump. It came in Georgia. He's now facing 4 different felony trials as he runs for president. Overnight, Trump, along with 18 other associates, including Rudy Giuliani, were indicted on charges of conspiring to overturn the 2020 election results in the state. Our team covering all the angles. Senior investigative correspondent Aaron Katersky starts us off in Atlanta. Good morning, Aaron.
George, good morning to you. The indictment returned here is expansive and encompassing. It charges 19 people with 41 counts, and it puts Donald Trump at the top of what prosecutors call a criminal enterprise. This morning, criminal case number 4, the state of Georgia versus Donald John Trump.
The indictment alleges that rather than abide by Georgia's legal process for election challenges, the defendants engaged in a criminal racketeering enterprise to overturn Georgia's presidential election result.
Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis charging Trump and 18 others, including some of his closest allies, with racketeering, calling them a criminal organization that knowingly and willfully joined a conspiracy to unlawfully change the outcome of the election in favor of Trump. The grand jury handed up the charges after dark. The indictment delivered to the clerk at 8:54 p.m., nearly 12 hours after prosecutors began presenting their case. Minutes later, it was handed to the judge for inspection.
Everything went as it should have in front of the grand jury.
Trump is charged with 13 counts in a sweeping and detailed indictment that cites acts in Georgia and beyond. In addition to racketeering, he's charged with soliciting a public officer to violate his oath, conspiring to commit forgery, and conspiring to file false documents. Before the vote, the grand jury heard testimony from several witnesses. Georgia's former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan says he was one of them.
There's been a lot of misinformation for a number of years, and this is our opportunity to get the real story out. My hope is that Americans believe us. My hope is that Republicans believe us, that this election was fair and legal.
The indictment says Trump made multiple calls to Georgia Republicans, including a leading state senator, the governor, the state attorney general, and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, whose phone call with Trump prompted the 2.5-year investigation.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
On that call, Raffensperger pushing back against Trump's claims.
You should want to have an accurate election, and you're a Republican.
We believe that we do have an accurate election.
No, you don't. No, you don't.
Also charged, Rudy Giuliani, who peddled falsehoods about the vote to the Georgia legislature.
Ruby Freeman and Shay Freeman Moss and one other gentleman quite obviously surreptitiously passing around USB ports as if they're vials of heroin or cocaine.
Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss told the January 6th committee Giuliani's bogus claims forced them into hiding.
There is nowhere I feel safe. Nowhere. Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States to target you?
The indictment also naming Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, who traveled to Georgia allegedly seeking access to an audit of the vote that was not open to the public, and Jeffrey Clark, a former Justice Department official who allegedly sought permission to convey false information about the election to Georgia officials. Trump has denied all wrongdoing, and overnight the Trump campaign releasing a statement saying in part they are taking away President Trump's First Amendment right to free speech. The district attorney has given all 19 defendants until noon, a week from Friday, to surrender. Otherwise, George, she will seek to have them all arrested. George.
And Aaron, it seemed like such a tense and somewhat chaotic situation down there.
It seemed that way, George, but really there were no sign of protesters, and all was calm despite all the anticipation of what would be returned here. Clearly, though, the district attorney expressed concern about security. The former president on social media lashed out against the prosecutor and against a witness, and so they really wanted to get this done. And now the DA says she's going to be pushing for a trial for all 19 defendants within the next 6 months. George.
Aaron Katersky, thanks very much. Let's bring in our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams, for more on this. Dan, a lot of overlap here with the last case brought by the special prosecutor on the January 6th investigation, but there are some key differences as well.
Yeah, this is a much more sweeping indictment here. It's much more fact-based, based on what happened exactly in Georgia, as opposed to every other state in the country. And in one sense, this is a more dangerous indictment for Donald Trump. It's effectively pardon-proof, right? In the sense that with a federal case, if he wins the election, he can kind of make it go away. This case, he can't do that with. But on the flip side of it, there are more sort of political attacks that Donald Trump and his team can make with regard to this case. There have already been issues with Fani Willis, for example, with a critical potential defendant and fundraising that she's done. And that has gotten into trouble with the judge in this case. So again, you have to look at this as law meets politics. How will the defense attack the case?
And one of the first things they're probably going to try to do then is get it to move into federal court, I would imagine. One, that will take time. It could get it past the election. And two, if it's in federal court, if they succeed, then of course the president could find a way, if he were elected again, to put the case away.
Right. You know, I think it's going to be hard for them to get it into federal court, but I think the argument they're going to make is that you can't prosecute this at all. They're going to say this is action taken by the president during his time as president. If that's the claim, they will argue, that kind of case should only be prosecuted by a federal court, not by a state prosecutor. I think it's one of the first arguments they're going to make. Now, by the way, they made this sort of argument in New York. It didn't work in that case. But remember, in that case, he wasn't president when the actual conduct occurred. Here you're talking about the period in December and January when he's president, and he will undoubtedly argue that that sort of conduct should be tried in a federal court. I'm not saying it's necessarily a winning argument, but it's undoubtedly an argument he's going to make.
Well, the president's been making a free speech defense as well, both in the special counsel's case, and he'll try to make it here as well. One big difference, though, with Georgia law, and Georgia law explicitly makes it a crime to have false statements.
Yeah, and I also think that it goes beyond that. That you've got the fake electors here, which I think is a critical piece here, right? You're talking about people who literally signed a document, who held a meeting, who declared that they were the duly elected representatives of the state when they weren't. That's very different from simply just advocating for, saying that the election should be overturned, etc. And then you've also got the tampering with the election equipment after January 6th. That's not a free speech argument. That's a question of what were you doing going and taking all the data off of these election machines? Those are some of the more difficult areas to defend that don't just deal with advocacy.
Every time this happens, I find it astonishing we're even having this conversation. Dan Abrams, thanks very much.
Well, hey there, GMA fans. Robin Roberts here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Lots of great stuff here. So go on, click the subscribe button right over here to get more of awesome videos and content from GMA every day, anytime. We thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the morning on GMA.